Okay, this is Tom Suter, the founder of ATARC, and we are at the bottom of the hour. And welcome to our Thursday afternoon after lunch IT webinar series. Today we're going to look at talk about the Federal Infrastructure and Operations Guide on delivering availability, compliance, and cyber resilience during a crisis. And we'd love to welcome all the attendees today. Thanks for joining us today on a Thursday afternoon. And I definitely wanted to thank Tara Blair, Sienna Abdulholian, and Gregg Butler and the rest of the Zerto team for making this possible. They've been a great partner, really care about the federal community. This afternoon, we're going to hear from our speakers, pop in a poll question or two, and then answer your questions. And then we're going to close out with a presentation from Gregg Butler, who's a systems engineer at Zerto. And real quick, we've got one of our panelists hasn't joined us yet, but we expect them on shortly. But we'll start, our first panelist we'll have today is Kevin Coyne. Hi, Kevin. Norman Spiker. We got Norman there with his background for the Department of Homeland Security. And then we've got Lon Gowan in my lower left pane out of Florida. And we have Gregg Butler with Zerto. And we'll get right into it. But first of all, I just wanted to kind of set the stage for what we're going to talk about today. My experience in cyber resilience came when I worked for a company, and it was back in the 90s, right when I got out of college, and I'm in IT, and I had to be the person who took the tapes home every night. So if there was any kind of issues with our systems, we had to bring that tape back in the next day and probably take about a week to upload it and get the system restored. Those might have been the good old days, because right now with cloud computing, and we don't even know where our data is. I mean, it's very difficult to know, because one day you might have it in your cloud, you might have it on your bare metal. Things are evolving and changing all the time. We're doing a lot of DevSecOps. Your system's changing all the time. There's lots of revisions. So how can if heaven forbid something were to happen, I've got to restore that immediately and find out where the last good state was. You know, a lot of and then we've had this pandemic, and somebody forgot to tell the cyber criminals to slow down on us a little bit. We're a little bit busy, but we've seen a lot of ransomware attacks, a lot of hits on our websites, and every once in a while something bad is going to happen. No matter what you do, no matter how much you invest in it, somebody's going to click on an email link, something is going to happen. And what do we find out? I was looking back on it. It was about a year ago today. The city of Baltimore had a huge ransomware attack. $18 million later, untold disruption to their entire system. They're back. But it's still having ramifications for that and their services to the citizens. So we're going to go ahead and get things going, and maybe Kevin Coyne, you can bring your perspectives to this conversation and what you're seeing over at Department of Commerce, and happy to have you.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's definitely appreciated. I know this is a critical area and a critical need for the nation in terms of what it is we're doing for cyber resiliency. Obviously, it's a goal, and we're out there every single day trying to pursue it and making sure we have a solid cybersecurity program in place. My background, just kind of starting off, studied finance, management information systems for my undergrad, took all that information, went and flew helicopters in the Army. So it's a different background, but the operations management is critical, whether you're on the battlefield or whether you're not in the battlefield. I mean, this is the fight. It's continuous. It's out there. We have to build our organizations to be resilient, right? Whether it's a military unit, whether it's a corporate company, whether it's your own federal agency or government agency, you have a mission to deliver. There's a business need. Every line of business has a dedicated goal, and it's your job, obviously, as a cybersecurity professional, to ensure that they can deliver on that business need. And they're going to find a way to do it, obviously. So it's your job to make sure they can do it in a manner that makes sense, in a manner that they can do what they need to do, right? So I mean, those are sort of the challenges. I know each agency is different. For commerce, it's pretty much everything in the kitchen sink. So we have a wide gambit of missions, from the census to the patent trade to where I'm at now, Bureau of Industry and Security. So export controls, export enforcement, really it's B2B primarily, as opposed to VA where it's, the government to veteran type arrangements and other agencies. But for us, it's B2B. It's making sure that American companies and governments open for business so we can deliver on what we need to. So cyber resiliency, you have to live it. Otherwise, businesses are not going to get what they need to do to help the American economy to progress where we need to be. So.
Yeah, and Kevin, one little follow-up before we move on to Lon. What are the special challenges you have in the Department of Commerce when you have lots of different sub-agencies and you're working at OCIO? Maybe illuminate some of those and sharing best practices and that type of.
Sure, absolutely. So the big thing, most federal agencies, right? So you're used to driving downtown, commute downtown, the Herbert C. Hoover Building, 14th in Pennsylvania every single day. 1932 was the world's largest building before the Empire State Building opened. So you have all these workers in this massive building.
Oh, wow.
And then the next day, you're going remote, right? And so everyone's got to be there. What are the resiliency? What is the pipe? Can the pipe handle it? Can all these other aspects of everyone working remote, how they getting in, how are you getting the devices for them, how are you getting their phones? Are they having to use personal devices for phones? So you've got to think through the whole gamut of IT services to make sure they're supported in a manner that's fitting, and then one that follows the acquisition rules is going to meet your FY20 budget, right? So you're going to see all these that you may not have planned in your budget, may not have planned in your acquisition process, and you've got to be able to respond for that. Luckily, we're not spending 2 hours a day commuting anymore, so you got to put some effort in, right? You got to get your organization to where it needs to be thinking about that. So it's not just the current operations, it's future operations, and then the realization to say, okay, this is where we need to be. How do we get there, and how can we get our organization to meet the demands of the business? Because for commerce, at least, the B2B businesses are still operating. What can we do to help them be successful, to help them get them the tools that they need, whether they're trying to export an item, whether they're trying to get an exclusion on a piece of steel that they're importing as part of Section 232, whether they're trying to get a patent done, whether they're trying to just fill out a census. So all those things you have to be thinking about. How do we support it? How do we maintain our resiliency? How do we get our workers to work to be productive? And how do we deliver for the U.S. economy?
Great. Our next panelist is Lon Gowan, and a couple things about Lon that are pretty interesting. Well, one is he is the chair of our Emerging Technologies Working Group. So basically, we try to dump every kind of new and emerging technology, and Lon handles it. And also, Lon changes his hairstyles quite frequently. He had the kind of the long-haired look, but he's altered his hairstyle like I did for the coronavirus. But thank you, Ron, for coming.
Hey, Tom. Hello, everybody on the panel and everybody that happens to be joining over the internet. Yeah, we do have kind of exciting times, and continuity of government, continuity of operations, cybersecurity, and all those wonderful things become kind of a pretty big player. So at USAID, we're keeping up with all that and doing quite well. I think one of the things that'll come out of all this is agencies, I think, will get a little bit better handle on those items, right? How do we do continuity of government when everybody is basically forced to be somewhere else? At least in my mind, when I think prior to, the COVID-19 experience, continuity of government, continuity of operations was, some event happened, not really this, and, a select few people would go somewhere and they would try and continue the key elements, of the operation of the mission of the agency or the company. And what we see here is that it's a little bit different scenario where we're trying to continue all operations, right? And not just key functions or ones that might be in a COOP plan. So that puts, kind of like Kevin was saying, it puts a pretty heavy load on the infrastructure and everything of a country or state or a local, municipality. And so I think we saw some of that. People that are on the webinar and stuff probably can recite occasions where phones dropped, where they couldn't even connect on a phone call and things like that. So yeah, looking forward to the discussions, and I'm glad to be here. Back to you, Tom.
Yeah, quick follow-up. You have a unique scenario, not unique, state and Department of Defense. You have to deal with these infrastructures in other countries that may not be as robust as ours. How have you seen that, especially during the pandemic, when everybody's trying to access services online and being at home? Have you noticed a significant change?
Yeah, so there's it's always a challenge for us and other agencies that have, like state, commerce even, and a lot of people have folks, around the globe, DoD especially, right? What we're seeing is the situations that kind of pop up that you wouldn't have pop up normally, and that is 100% telework, right? Pretty much with social distancing. So that brings with it some pretty interesting problems, one of which overseas, to answer your question, is not always does somebody have really good internet access from wherever they live. And so if I'm in, South Africa or Ethiopia or Thailand or someplace, I go back home, I'm normally, I don't have to worry about teleworking maybe. And so now they're having to do this 100% of the time, and their internet service at wherever they live is insufficient. And so trying to come around those barriers and find other providers during these kinds of situations, this is the kind of stuff that's going to pop up, and we need to have plans for in the future. Back to you.
Right. Thank you, Lon. And Norman, let us know about your experiences there at DHS. And I was particularly interested in how do you deal with other folks outside your environment?
Actually, the question to Lon, I see a lot of similarities, because one of the things, so first and foremost, my name is Norman Spiker with DHS. Most of my experience, professional experience, has been in IT architecture of PSAP systems. So anything that PSAPs and or public safety run, from CAD to RMS to GIS to any plethora of mobile or information systems, I've generally been involved with. S&T, at S&T, we specifically identify capability gaps. So the particular area that one of my big projects that I'm working in now is dealing with collaboration. And back to the point at hand, we do see in a very similar fashion, we do see great disparity in the CMM, the sort of IT maturity of agencies, because there's wide disparity. From those agencies that deal with the federal government on a regular basis and are up to, a DOJ or a DOD standard in terms of security and rigor. And then you have the more rural, less, certainly smaller budgets, less skilled personnel, perhaps, that are dual-hatted. They're an officer during the day, they're IT support at night, that are the opposite, right? The opposite end of the spectrum. So very much what some of our projects are trying to do is level set, provide a framework that we can build on, and we're using a collaboration platform as that lowest tier of entry. Recognizing that if we can create a secure, resilient environment there, then eventually we could bring other sort of PSAP systems into that framework and grow the consistency across agencies to be much more robust.
Yeah, and it seems like we've learned some of the lessons over the last few years, the Katrina, the forest fires. It seems like America, unfortunately, sometimes we have to learn the hard way on some things. So,
or repeatedly, right?
Yeah. So I guess you guys are applying every time there is something. It seems like you guys have applied it to try to improve it for the next situation that occurs.
Certainly, you have it exactly right. Yeah. It is disappointing, and there are times that you can't avoid having build from the ground up again. But certainly with the GII and various resources, we're trying to put things in place that are maintained rather than having to be spun up at the critical moment when you need information, you need data, you need a secure platform. It's run the gamut in terms of successful and less than successful, but that certainly is much more pervasive in all of our programs.
Great, fantastic. And last, but certainly not least, Gregg Butler, we'd love to get your perspectives. You have the opportunity to work across government, so you see a lot of what the government is doing, and I know Zerto does a lot on the commercial side as well. Welcome.
Thank you. Afternoon, everybody. Gregg Butler, systems engineer with Zerto. So I've got history in IT going back to 1999. So Tom, I was the guy dealing with the tapes as well.
You're a tape guy,
still
huh?
see them. I was a tape guy. Yeah, still see them today. But it's definitely, thankfully, decreasing in use. And I love how you said that you and Lon, you know, have a longer haircut currently. I'm clearly winning shaggiest panelist award. I have not seen my barber in about 3 months. But yeah, I mean, I heard a lot of points here that we're seeing all across the commercial and federal space. You know, I spent time doing federal contracting, mostly at the SBA. I actually did a little stint, Kevin, down at Department of Commerce. That is a massive building, by the way. I liked being able to get into the aquarium with my commerce badge for free, by the way. That was really, really cool. Yeah, did some Active Directory assessment stuff down there. But I've also been on the commercial side. I've been on, more recently before Zerto, cloud managed service provider, providing FedRAMP compliance services to the federal government. And, you know, the challenges that are sort of being exacerbated now, you know, I heard from Kevin, you know, availability is a challenge. You know, home networks are getting slammed. Circuits to agency buildings are getting slammed. People are going to hyperscalers, right? For that reason, we've seen a surge in requests. Well, how can I get to Azure? How can I get to AWS? Because they have the scale. They've run into some issues as well, right? With scaling up. I mean, right. Teams is seeing unprecedented, you know, surges just like Zoom and WebEx and everything else. But one of the other things that is really being highlighted in this is something Lon said. You know, it's not just mission critical things that are being affected. It's all operations, and that's something that we oftentimes, you know, try to drive home, you know, across commercial and federal space. There's not really mission critical systems. There's business critical or agency critical. Mm-hmm. And when things start to break down like this, you realize, you know, all those systems are even the supporting ones that tier 2 and 3 are very, very important. So this is great insight from you guys. And, you know, I can say that we're seeing much of the pains that you're feeling as well.
Great, thank you, Greg. And I'm going to ask some questions of the group, but feel free. We have a Q&A. I know there's some reporters out there. If you have any questions, just feel free to do that. We're going to do a poll in a minute, but maybe we can drill down into, over the last 10 years, I think the federal government's really embraced cloud computing, and there's a lot of great capabilities. You know, especially when you have an environment that's all over the world, as everybody on the call has dealt with. What are some of the challenges of backing up your data and having resiliency with cloud and restoring it to that state? If anybody wants to chime in on that topic, what are the challenges that we do have with the cloud computing?
So I'll just jump in, unless you want to go ahead, Norman.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say, it's interesting in my personal experience, the agencies, PSAPs are evolving to embrace cloud computing. So they've got the unique situation where they've historically owned their infrastructure, or at least the larger agency have. And to embrace the new technology, oftentimes they've had to merge or consider a hybrid of both their own data center and or databases, you know, infrastructure, and merge that resiliency and that backup across both in-house and cloud-based, which has created an interesting sort of dynamic. Kevin?
Right.
Yeah, Kevin. Definitely. Just, I mean, as an operations manager, you've got to go in and say, what is the workload that we're putting on there? How much did I allocate in my Azure costs? Now that it's shifted, do I need to go back and ask for reprogramming? Do I need to go ask for some sort of budget shift? Because I was anticipating this level of workload as part of my cloud computing costs. So, we're not, when I was in DoD, I worked for a rapid acquisition group, the Joint IED Defeat Organization, and their budget, my budget now is really like a rounding error. So what it is now, but when you're a smaller bureau and your budget is a certain amount, you really have to take a hard look to say, okay, how are we controlling costs? How are we controlling cloud costs? What are these shifts doing from a cloud management standpoint? I mean, I get the weekly Azure bill and I'm looking at that and seeing where it's at, who did what. So just making sure that you sort of have a really strong portfolio management. You take that sort of enterprise perspective of what's going on across my enterprise, what are the changes that are happening, how do I adapt for those cloud adjustments that I know are going to happen, so how can I forecast to make sure that folks are aware of the coming shift, and is it just one quarter, is it 6 months, is it for the next year, how are you managing those loads, and who's looking at the costs? So when the bill shows up, 30 days later, you're like, ooh, that was my, so it's really managing that billing and understanding your forecasting model and working with your finance team, step in step to make sure that they're there to support you.
Yeah, one of our working groups in the cloud working group specifically is looking at the bills and comparing them. If you thought your telephone bill was hard to comprehend, wait till you get a cloud computing bill. Okay, we are going to do a poll, Madeline. Why don't we try to put one of our polls out? Now, everybody can answer this really quickly. We tabulate it. We're not going to say what you voted for. First question, has your organization implemented any new IT security measures in the midst of increased threats from COVID-19? Very good question. How confident, number two, how confident are you in your agency's current ability to recover data and applications in the event of a disruption? We're getting right to it on this poll. We'll give it a second. All right, Madeline, let's close the poll. There we go. 46% is quite a bit, I would say. Somewhat confident, 51%. What do you think, panel? Does this surprise you? Is this what you might think it would be?
This doesn't surprise me at all. So, the security boundaries have completely changed in the midst of all this. I mean, you've got, folks at home dialing in with VPN clients to, networks that may be highly secure. And I mean, it requires definitely new technologies to monitor and ensure that those systems are compliant.
So I guess the following question is, what has changed in each of your agencies, if anything inside your agencies that you can point to that you had to change a couple things, either yourself or your CISO or what have you, that you know of in your agency? Because a lot of these stories we don't know yet. It takes a little while for these to bubble up, but I think it would be helpful to the people on the webinar. Anybody want to add to that?
I mean, I think just one of them is just license count, making sure you're not violating any of your software asset management. Because typically, if it's a snow day in DC, how many people are coming in on your network, right? And then you say, okay, well, that's 24 to 48 hour period versus a sustained period, right? So you got to go make sure you're doing your software asset management appropriately as it relates to license counts. And so that's probably that's a big one right there, just making sure you have enough licenses to cover the folks who would usually be in the office and not be remoting in. And then if a device goes out, how do you do device management in terms of end of life device, migrating from Windows 7 to Windows 10, or whether you're doing some other sort of updates? How do you get that device into the hands of your IT service team to manage? So you've got to it's all about adjusting your business processes to support the new norm in terms of what is we're doing. So there's current ops, which is just, okay, everyone's working remote, let's address the immediate, but if there's a future ops to say, how are we looking at our future business processes to support a higher percentage of remote workers, and what can we do to help them be successful from home, and it's getting ahead of, again, I'll go back to when I was in DoD, the Joint ID Defeat Organization. It's getting ahead of boom. How do we help the soldiers know where an event's going to occur before it happens, right? So it's getting ahead of the events. It's that future ops planning that you really have to take into account.
I'm curious how many of our agencies that I touch on have accelerated their either pushed the risk downstream or managed it in some way that I'm not familiar with, but have accelerated their adoption of bring your own device and other paradigms that they weren't terribly comfortable with.
Yep.
I don't know that they've necessarily embraced it or that they're fully prepared for it, but they've been forced to accept it. Either that, or as we refer to, operations come to a halt, because it's not just critical ops, it's ops in general.
Yeah. Yeah. It's how do you get a new CAC or PIV card? Before, I used to go into the agency, and where did I get that now? How do I pick up my laptop? Just some basic things there. How about you, Lon? Anything you might want to add to this?
Yeah, so I'll add that I used to do tape drives too, Greg and Tom. So mine goes all the way back to probably 1983 with a Honeywell 6620 mainframe with 7 9-track vacuum tape drives.
I know well. Come on, guys.
Yeah. So I even did card punches. Let's take a survey on card punches. But no. Hey, I even did paper tape readers for a while, so that's going way back as well. Anyway, from a cyber perspective, changes, what we're saying and what I'm reading, across the realm from agencies as well as private sector is that, any event like this basically provides an opportunity for attacks, phishing attacks and whatever, right? Because people want to know.
Yeah.
Right. This particular one, because it's kind of worldwide, I think it's especially, appropriate for the bad guys and the people just out there trying to have fun, little malicious fun, to get in, right? It's all over the world. So it's something, an easy one is obvious, right? Let's create an app that tracks COVID, and we're going to insert some nice goodies in there for them. A nice Trojan horse kind of thing. And so that's the kind of stuff that, I think agencies right now are kind of warning folks about. Just be careful, not to use these kinds of sites, go to trusted sites, the usual stuff we do. It's just that people have a tendency to forget when one of these crises hit and, they just go out and say, oh man, let's grab the latest news. What's the latest news? Oh, this website has some good stuff. Oh, shouldn't have gone there. That kind of thing. So that's one. And the other one is just kind of, just to remind people we're, a little more frequently on stuff like this, just to be cautious. So those are kinds of some of the big ones from our perspective. Back to you. Great.
We got a question from a real good one from the audience here. What IT architecture frameworks will need a revisit with the big push to remote capabilities such as VPN, MS Teams, Mattermost, etc.? And do you see more of a ZT network architecture DevSecOps approach to making sure the right data gets to the right people? I mean, I heard a lot of, but this is like our 4th webinar. I've heard a lot of tangential things of things not working. Anybody want to take a first shot at that one?
I'll take I'll take a stab at it first. I'll ring off of one of the things Kevin said earlier as well. There's all these things, and Tom, you brought it up also. There's all these things that go on in agencies that we're so used to doing in person. You mentioned laptops. We're talking about cell phones because of issues in the past, shall we say, with anthrax and things like that. Agencies and companies have central receiving and sending facilities, right? So they can kind of check packages as they come and go. That's those things get closed down, right? Depending on the agency and stuff. And so then how do you do these things, right? How do you check things? How do you deliver stuff? So that's the one. From the architecture side, I think what people are going to see is a new look at VDI and virtual desktop infrastructures and how to do that effectively, especially if you're talking about, agencies that have a worldwide presence like USAID, state, and others. And then depending on the number of people, right, you need to have, I think what probably a lot of agencies and companies saw during this and are still seeing is scalability, right? Our architectures, had a different view of scalability prior to COVID-19. Scalability was, okay, we can pretty much predict what's going to happen. Nobody's ever predicting that there's going to be a mandatory remote work policy that everybody has to follow, right? And so now you're putting a load on the system, like we talked about before, that just wasn't there. It's also going to stress what we used to think in our architecture was norm. So back to you guys.
We've got another question. How has working remotely limited remote workers in using business applications in order for them to do their work? As agencies try to move specific applications to the cloud, it's almost impossible to put all their business applications in the cloud and then manage it, right? I mean, we have a mix in the federal government. How is moving all these remote workers, and you're used to having this system and you're in the building and it's on a server in the building, I guess, something like that. Does anybody want to comment to that?
Yeah, I definitely think it's caused us to shift more to like, okay, what can we do in terms of things in the cloud, in terms of application rationalization, to say, okay, what really needs to be on premise? Can we go to like a hyper-converged infrastructure solution that you can manage remotely really from anywhere versus having physical servers that you have to go touch? I know we've looked at managed service providers. I mean, so it sort of changed our future operations and how aggressive we were planning on getting there. So I think there's definitely some really nice solutions that are out in the marketplace right now that we've taken a lot harder look at than I think we would have, where we would be at, I think at this point, where I thought I would be in FY20 versus where we thought we would be in FY21, 22. So just sort of it's just really that acceleration of those technologies that are out in the marketplace. Corporate America's, most corporate agencies, bigger companies have already moved to. It's just a matter of like, what can I get there faster as a federal entity given my existing budget? What can we do to accelerate certain applications or, if you look at other solutions from what should be in a FISMA moderate environment versus FISMA high, and you look at Microsoft Office, Microsoft Azure Government, which is FISMA high, what are AWS version, obviously, and other versions out there. What are you doing? What should be in a FISMA high versus FISMA moderate environment? Does that change? But it all really comes back to that application rationalization of where should this data really exist and how hard is it for it to get there? And then how hard is it for the business user to get to it? And how hard is it for the government user to really access those data sets so they can get the work done? And at the end of the day, it goes back to give the business what they need to do what they need to do and do it in a way that makes sense.
Yeah, I don't know how, I've been on a lot of projects in my life, and I still remember, we're going to have the server under this person's desk in a federal building in DC. That's not going to cut it. You're not going to have somebody to go turn it on every time the application hangs up. Let's do one more poll. Madeline, can we do one more poll? All right. Have security and data privacy concerns significantly delayed your IT monitors initiatives? That's an interesting question. And also, what are the biggest challenges in meeting federal modernization requirements? All right. We'll give it a second here. All right, let's call it on this. Can we? Okay. That's actually pretty good. I mean, I've been doing this now for a while, and usually when you're trying to do some IT modernization, I think one of the things is the security always comes in. Wow, we can't put it in the cloud because of security. So I think maybe that might have changed from the last 5 years. It's hard to say. Biggest challenge in meeting federal modernization requirements: cloud first initiatives, 43%, hardware modernization, containerization. Any takeaways we can take from this? Anything surprise our panelists?
I think at least, I can only speak for S&T, and I think our data retention policies still lag. I think PII is still a big hurdle to overcome, and I've had repeat conversations again and again, and that tends to stifle our our migration, probably more so than any other issue. Just understanding the nature of the data and whether everyone's comfortable, and maybe in the way that Kevin suggested, what's really required in terms of the level of security.
Right. Anybody else?
I'll jump in real quick. Yeah, I'll jump in real quick,
Yeah.
Tom. Yeah, so the security one seems about normal to me, I guess, maybe a little bit low. That was question one. I mean, normally I've been in a lot of agencies, as you know, and typically what I see in IT security is people running around with shirts on that have on the back of them "just say no," and the idea is that IT security and other areas, for that matter, we're picking on them right now with this question, but other areas are similar. Sometimes we just forget to use common sense. And people, you know, and that's one of the things that's kind of the theme of this particular webinar is, you know, let's make security decisions and other decisions based on risk, right? And that's where things are kind of migrating with this cloud smart idea is let's get back to the risk management of things. And we forget that we get so wrapped up in our process and procedure that people, you know, it's almost like a stupid checklist where people forget to think, you know, and that's okay. Yeah, you don't have that, check, fail. Whoa, what? And that kind of thing. So that may be some of the stuff that drives question 2 on, you know, the cloud first initiative stuff, and why that number's pretty high is because as soon as you start mentioning some of this, depending on, you know, the people receiving it, they just aren't sometimes thinking with common sense. So that's kind of my perspective and my experience. Back to you guys.
And I think just on there, right? Because right now it's really, we're looking at the FY22 budget proposals that are going in. And one of the biggest changes I've seen just in the submittals is like, we have to make sure the business is getting what it needs from an IT standpoint. And the business does a better job of understanding IT. So when you first said cloud, like, ooh, that's scary. You're like, okay, hold on. And now I think that the tone has changed because they become educated, right? Like if that server is in behind a desk somewhere, and that guy's not there, versus an SLA, like in its Amazon data center, right? And you have a set SLA under contract to do a certain requirement, you know it's getting updated, right? So I think it just sort of, it's educating the business to understand what IT is. I think business has gotten a lot smarter in terms of IT in the last 3 to 5 years. I mean, I think it's night and day from where the conversation started when I first joined the Commerce Department to where they are now. It's how do we get there yesterday, right? I mean, so there's definitely some significant changes, and I think the business has to drive it, but the business needs to know what the options are that are out there for them to really help them out, so you can help them make the business case.
Well, I have a good, really perceptive question coming in. I don't attribute these, but it's what advice do you have for agencies? They probably have a roadmap. They're going to the cloud. They mean to, and now we have COVID-19, and they have to go to the cloud on their applications almost right away. And with the remote capabilities, how do you do crisis IT modernization? And we've seen it happen many times. We've seen the SBA had to stand up a website to do the Paycheck Protection Program. What advice do you have for folks that have to accelerate this IT modernization? And I think most of the agencies have had a little bit of that.
Yeah, I think you have to adopt your platform, right? So you've got to sit there and say, what's our platform? How are we managing that platform? Are we trained to have a team in place that can manage that platform? And then really just platform adoption versus these one-offs of a single website, right? You've got to say, okay, is the IT team in place to support that platform? And can we scale that platform? And we should know how to scale it. So I think it's more platform adoption and a more holistic approach to how you're delivering your services.
This is long.
I would say,
on that one. Go ahead. Go ahead. I'll follow up after.
Thanks, Lon. You know, ideally, you want to look at the different applications, see what fits in public cloud, you know, rationalize it, you know, make it as cloud native as possible. We don't really have that luxury right now, right? So, you know, it may be a matter of a lift and shift into public cloud for the time being, just to give the scale, you know, at the compute storage and particularly the bandwidth layer, because that's what is really choking us. You know, we're going from 1 gig 10, 40 gig connections in these offices to everybody having 1 gig connections, trying to connect back into an office, maybe over a 10 gig connection. I mean, the math just doesn't work. So in the very, very short term, you know, lift and shift into public cloud, rationalize it, figure it out later, maybe, unfortunately, an approach that has to be taken.
And Lon, you wanted to chip in on that?
Yeah, so it's a tough thing to try and do quickly. It just depends on the application, the system, and we never want to forget the you know, the old phrase, right? Haste makes waste, right? The devil's always in the detail is another one. So it really boils down to the specific system. If it's a simple system like Gregg's talking about, to, you know, we can forklift in and we can scale it easily to meet whatever, you know, the need is, then that's, you know, probably an acceptable alternative. If it's something where we need to basically establish an enclave in one of the public, you know, cloud service providers such as AWS, IBM, whatever, Azure, then getting all that set up and doing it well and meeting, you know, one of the themes of this webinar, you know, cybersecurity, cyber resilience. You don't want to leave a big, you know, gaping hole in a new enclave you're standing up. Somebody can get in there and own you before you know it, and you may not find out for years. So we just need to be a little bit careful and deliberate about how we go about doing that. Back to you.
Yep. Okay, we're getting closer to the end and the beginning on this. Maybe we can go through each of the panelists and maybe some last second thoughts we didn't get a chance to discuss on this topic. Can we maybe start with Kevin?
Sure. So I think the big thing here is, remember, just cyber resiliency is a goal, right? You got to work with your business. You have to know what does the business need, and just get your team just really dialed in to deliver on that service. So when they walk away, there's a deep appreciation for the IT team, and they see IT as a partner. And that's the big thing, is having strategic communications up and down with leadership. Communicate, whether it's with the CFO, with your undersecretaries, your assistant secretaries, your help desk, your contractors. They all need to be on the same page, that same enterprise perspective, to be able for you to deliver with the goal of cyber resiliency, because the mission is going to continue. The big green mission rolls on, right? So, you know, it's there. You want to make sure that you're there to support it, and they view you as a partner in this, and you want to make sure you can deliver on that goal.
Okay, Norman?
I'll just say I'm anxious to learn a lot of the lessons learned with this acceleration that's occurred during this period, because I think it will help to baseline at least many of the agencies that we deal with, and overcome some of those historic impediments that have long sort of slowed embracing cloud computing, cloud resilience, at least from you know, again, from a state and local perspective.
I think you're right. I think that Monday morning quarterback and the autopsy of this thing, you see people got some incredible things done rapidly, and why can't we maybe not be so much crisis management, but we should be accelerating what we should be doing the right thing anyway.
You know, honestly,
Lon?
I think, I was just going to say, Lon, I think we lose sight of the fact that it is risk management, and COVID has forced us to focus on the fact that this is risk management, and some risk has to be acceptable. You know, as you said, the going in position can't be no, because we can't function with no.
Great. And Lon?
Yeah, so the you know, from a cyber perspective, I think what Kevin and Norman and everybody are saying is on target. What we're going to see is number one, you know, we've already noticed what kind of things the bad guys are doing, just being aware of that. And then number two, the risk management idea is really the key. If we're going to migrate stuff, we're going to do it quickly. In some cases, we really can. And it goes back to my prior thought of, you know, let's just do things that make sense, common sense, right? We don't need to always follow the checklist, you know, every time if we can make a decision and eliminate part of it, right? So those things I think are really going to help in the future. And I think the security piece of things, especially under crises like this, are hopefully going to improve, and we'll see some policies and processes in that front across the agencies and the private sector go that way. So back to you, Tom.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Kevin, Norman, and Lon. We appreciate your inputs, and we're going to turn this over to Gregg, and he's going to kind of walk us through, we're going to learn a little bit more about resilience, IT resilience. Are you ready to take over, Gregg?
I am. Thanks, Tom.
Okay.
Just a second, I'll share my screen out.
Thank you all. Okay. There we go.
All right, good stuff. So this has been great. I want to say thanks to the other panelists, and this is really enlightening and gave some really good talking points. So I'll try to expand on some of the things that came up. Ongoing initiatives across federal space, but also obviously things that are more relevant given the current situation. So we're living in a life disrupted. We all know that. Things are accelerating. Microsoft has seen, 2 years of digital transformation occur in the last 2 months. Tom mentioned that ransomware is up 150% since COVID, broke onto the scene. So everybody is challenged across commercial, federal, and in our personal lives with living in a life disrupted. So I'm going to try to tie in how Zerto can hopefully address some of those ongoing needs and current pressures. We are at our core a cloud mobility, disaster recovery, and backup IT resilience platform. So what does that mean for the federal space? So I'm not going to go through this acronym and initiative soup. You guys all know what this stuff means probably a lot better than I do. But we touched on a number of these 4 pillars today: cloud governance, cybersecurity, and modernization. So where Zerto seeks to assist federal agencies across those pillars are condensed into these 3 main buckets. So continuous availability, this is your traditional business continuity disaster recovery use case, right? So you're protecting against facility, infrastructure outages, fiber cuts, power hits, whatever. Ransomware, again, on the rise, unfortunately. It's not a matter of if, but a question of when, as a lot of folks say. And this all ties back into your governance and cybersecurity postures. How are you protecting your data? What's the distance between your data centers? What's your recovery time objective? What's your recovery point objective? How much data can you lose in the event of a physical disaster or a ransomware attack? And one thing that I would definitely strongly counsel on, and this came out in the poll, 51%, I think it was, were somewhat confident in their ability to recover from an incident. I would make sure that there is a tie-in between what IT directors say they're going to implement and the SLAs they're going to meet, and what the expectations of the agency CIOs and chiefs actually are, because a lot of times there's a disconnect there. I've seen that across commercial and the federal space. Make sure you're meeting those RPOs, those RTOs that you've got spelled out in your system security plan. Second bucket here is workload mobility. So infrastructure modernization and consolidations. Those 2 things have one thing in common, and that is disparate systems. So this can be especially challenging in the federal space. You might be limited by annual budget, but you desperately need to upgrade infrastructure on, say, your primary side, maybe you wait till next fiscal year to get the secondary side. That's a challenge a lot of times because so much of the technologies out there need like for like. Zerto's abstracted away from that, so we can replicate between disparate systems, be it different storage, different compute, etc. So this greatly helps with an agency's modernization initiatives and the retirement of those legacy systems. Devops and testing. This is the future, right? And everything that can be done with Zerto through the GUI can be done programmatically. So where this assists federal agencies, you have the ability to spin up workloads in isolated bubbles. You can do this for patch testing, non-disruptive vulnerability scanning. Anytime you need to spin up an ephemeral environment to perform any sort of actions and then tear it back down, Zerto is a fantastic use case in assisting with that temporary sandbox implementation. Last pillar here, I've got DCOI, data center consolidation, twice because there's overlap, right? This is two sides of the same coin. You're retiring your legacy systems in the second pillar, and where might you be going? Might be going to public cloud. So Zerto is multi-cloud. We can protect workloads between private clouds up into public clouds as well for those hybrid cloud initiatives. And the key here, a couple of the panelists touched on it. You got to be smart about going into public cloud. And I saw this in my previous job. I was at a FedRAMP cloud managed service provider, and agencies would charge in, we want to go to the cloud, we want to go to the cloud. And we would, do an assessment and steer them to where best their workload might fit. And, if it's a mode one, so a traditional, on-premise workload, it may not necessarily belong in the cloud. It might be too expensive. It might not perform well. So, be smart about choosing where those workloads go. Zerto has the ability to really make that a lot easier. You can spin up workloads from your on-prem into public cloud with the push of a button, have them isolated from the on-prem environment, so completely non-disruptive, and test these workloads. See if they're going to work well. Do they work better in Azure or AWS? Do they not work at all? And then tear them down. And if some do, if they are suited for public cloud, you can use Zerto to migrate up into public cloud. And key, I think Kevin brought it up with the looking at the Azure bill on a monthly basis, which I've seen them. They're terrifying. If you get a workload up there and it doesn't work, Zerto has the ability to get you back out. We're really the only product on the market that can replicate you back out of public cloud onto on-prem at any sort of scale. Just high level, the two takeaways on this slide here. We're a continuous data protection product. So unlike, competition out in the marketplace, we're not replicating data every 12, 24 hours. It's generally in the area of 5 to 15 seconds. So your RPOs, your possible data loss in a disaster or ransomware scenario, very, very small. And then the box on top, orchestration and automation. I don't care how cool the widget is that gets your data from point A to point B. If you can't bring up your workloads in a consistent and meaningful fashion in a reasonable amount of time, it's not of any use to your agency and to your agency's mission. So push button orchestration and automation is key. I'm an engineer, I'm not going to get into the technical weeds. What I want to highlight here is simplicity. So Zerto is extremely simple to deploy. There are two components, a virtual manager and a replication appliance, and you can install both of them in about 25 minutes. Why is this important? Last year, we had an agency, a contractor at a federal agency come to us and say that, you know, they were going down a certain path of providing a DR, meeting the SLAs that the agency required, and they hit a brick wall. And they had previous conversations with us and asked us to get on the phone and help them do a proof of concept. We ended up deploying Zerto into the environment, replicating virtual machines between their two sites, failing it over, having them take screenshots, and failing them back to the original site. We did that in 1 hour and 43 minutes from start to finish. So when I say simple, I do mean simple, and that is key to ensure that any product that you deploy in your agency is used and is used properly. Only thing I want to highlight here, there's lots of boxes, is that you know, I mentioned we can replicate and protect into public cloud as well as migrate workloads into public cloud. The key takeaway here is that the architecture is very, again, simple in public cloud. We have a ZCA or Zerto Cloud appliance, and we write only to object storage in public cloud. And what that means to your agency is it's cheap. You're not running images, virtual machines 24 hours a day in public cloud. Those only get created on failover during a disaster or ransomware attack. So this is what we're driving for right here, this image. So your workloads, your applications, wherever you need them to be, between on-prem clouds, public clouds, or ideally in a thoughtfully implemented hybrid situation. So Zerto gives you that push button capability to move those and migrate those workloads wherever they need to be. A little bit into the secret sauce of how we do this. So I mentioned we're protecting every 5 to 15 seconds with continuous protection, and we're doing that to what's called a journal disk. And that very simply is likened to a DVR for your application workload. So you have the ability to roll back very quickly to a very granular point in time. So in this scenario, ransomware hits at 5:01 and 56 seconds. You can roll back to 5 seconds before that occurred and spin those workloads up in a matter of minutes. And it's key to talk about, you know, where we really differentiate ourselves from traditional protection products. So in this scenario, you've got 4 components that make up an application. And protection is typically done in a serial fashion, right? I've had federal agencies actually tell me that their backups take 3 days to complete because all of these systems are being done in a serial fashion. In this case, the app server is done at 11 p.m., database at 2 a.m., file server maybe not till 4 a.m. So right out of the box, you're potentially inconsistent when you go to recover those systems. So what Zerto is doing, and this is between your on-prem private clouds or up into public cloud, we are protecting those systems every several seconds, and we're keeping each of the components, each of those servers consistent to the exact same point in time, so that when you go to fail them over, they are exactly as they were 5 seconds prior to the incident in your primary environment. So what I've been talking mostly about is availability, right? Ability to spin up workloads at a secondary site with the push of a button to keep your agency's mission rolling. The other aspect of data protection is pretty, pretty heavily weighted in the federal government towards compliance, and that's backups. Apart from maybe financial and healthcare industries, government has typically the longest retention requirements. So we introduced long-term retention. That's our answer to backups. We don't call it backups just because it works fundamentally different. It's basically all occurring at the secondary site. There's no impact to production. Just gives you the ability to offload that replicated data to your secondary storage of choice and keep it for as long as you wish. This can also be targeted towards public cloud object storage. So you can send it up to Amazon S3. And coming later this year, you can do the same for Azure object storage. So this is what you're getting with the Zerto data protection. You're covering the short-term retention requirements, which you can see here within the first 30 days is where 86% of recovery and restorations come from. And everything after that is a compliance checkbox. 6 years from now, I might need to pull a file off for some sort of legal hold or customer inquiry. And wrapped around all of this, short-term, long-term protection, data mobility is, intelligent indexing and searching so that you can find the files that you need, whether they, got deleted 5 seconds ago or 5 years ago. And wrapped all around that is data protection workflows or automation to make that data usable in a timely fashion. Picture's worth 1,000 words. So this is the Zerto main GUI. In order to recover systems, simply click the failover button. You can choose the entire data center, a single virtual machine, or a single application. And then you choose your point in time. If this is a power outage at the primary facility, you're going to choose your latest checkpoint from, say, 5 seconds ago. If you're rolling back in time from ransomware, you're going to want to go back to an earlier point in time. You can see in this example, we've got checkpoints every 6 seconds. So you can roll back to a very, very granular point in time before the incident occurred. And then you click Start Failover. That's it. It's literally 5 left clicks of a mouse to fail systems over from your primary site to your other private cloud site or up into public cloud, fully orchestrated and automated. The failover testing it's a piece of what we do, but it's a very important piece, particularly in the federal space. You actually have to prove that you can perform your DR activities in the time that you state in your system security plan. So, Zerto provides reporting to this effect. Anytime you do a DR test, we create a canned report for you. It does not have to be branded Zerto, by the way. You can remove that. Gives you a full outline of everything that was performed. You can sign data, hand it off to your CIO, external auditor, whoever needs to see it. Last slide, 2 slides actually. I know we're running a little bit long. This is the don't take my word for it slide. We have a pretty substantial deployment across DoD, civilian, and intel in the federal government. So talk to your friends, reach out and see how Zerto has made their agency's mission a little bit easier, helping them sleep better at night, particularly in the current state. Last slide. This is a lot less exciting than it was supposed to be. Our ZertoCon was supposed to be at the Hard Rock Hotel in Miami. Now it's going to be in your living room or your home office. But please come join us on June 10th. It's going to be a half-day session. You can learn more about the product. learn more about business continuity, disaster recovery. We're going to be talking about containers, our support for that coming later this year, ransomware, and workload mobility, migration up into public cloud. It's going to be a great half-day packed agenda. So please join us. That is all I have. I know I'm 5 minutes over our allotted time. So I just want to thank everybody for giving me the 20 minutes here, and thank ATARC and our panelists again. Really appreciate it.
And thank you for those of you hanging in. It's actually, we've done pretty well, even though we went a little over, but it was worth it. Thank you, Gregg, for this. I definitely learned a lot through this process, and this isn't one of those things you want to do after the fact. You want to get this installed before you have that disaster. Fantastic. Thanks again for everybody, and we will see you next Thursday after lunch.